Entering your first job in industry, whether it's an internship or an actual job, is kind of a culture shock for many. For me, a lot of the tools and technologies took a long time for me to get used to, so I want to save you the kind of culture shock that I went through myself. Hi, I'm Laura, a product manager working in tech, and on my channel I share my life as a PM, my life working in tech, and other computer science related advice. Knowing these 6 items I'm going to talk about today are going to be really helpful when it comes to finding your feet and finding comfort in your first industry role. First is going to be version control. When working in industry, each company will have kind of its own process of getting code that is written by one person merged into the overall stream of software. Commonly, people use version control to do this. Basically, people store all their code into a big house called a repository, and it keeps track of all the different changes that have been made, labeling each one as a different version. Then, if anything ever goes wrong, you can always revert back to a different version and revert the changes, and you can also see who has made what changes, as well as what their contributions were. The most popular software and the one that you'll probably use is going to be called Git, which has its own series of commands that you can go ahead and learn anytime. You've probably heard of GitHub, which is just a site in which you can store these repositories and that they will host those repositories for you. Understanding the very basics of Git will save you so much time, frustration, and heartache later down the road. The most common process for a workflow looks a little bit like this. You'll probably work with an existing codebase that lives in a repository somewhere out there in the far internet land. You'll take this repository and clone it onto your local machine. Now you have your own copy of the codebase. You'll probably also make your own branch, which is just your own little path of changes that you can track. Now that you've made all your changes, you're going to have to push your changes. This is so that everyone else can see the changes that you've made and that the repository itself recognizes that you've made these changes. For most people, the next step is actually putting in a pull request, which means that you just want to merge your branch with a different branch. Lastly, people will often probably do a code review, which means looking through the changes that you've made and making sure that everything looks good and that everything is up to par. Once that's all said and done, you'll probably get a green light and be able to merge your branch directly in. And congrats, if you followed so far, then you basically have the basics of Git. A lot of companies now are also using something called CI/CD, or continuous integration, continuous development. Basically, it's the process that I previously described, and software is just continuously updated as these pull requests get merged in, instead of being all merged at one time. It also has automated checks and tests that get run against the changes that you've made, so it makes sure that you haven't broken the software or introduced any sort of malicious code. The second thing school probably didn't teach you is going to be the exact programming language that you need in your internship or full-time job. It's very, very likely that your school program will teach you just a particular set of languages, such as Python or C++ or Java. Your school won't teach you every framework or language in the sun because there are just so many, and especially some of the newer languages, it's hard to adopt and throw into a school curriculum like Rust or Go. If you do want to get into web development, then your work is a little bit cut out for you because you just basically have to know JavaScript, and then every other framework is pretty simple to add on to from there. But what if you don't want to do web development? It's going to be pretty hard to be 100% prescriptive otherwise, so you have to know how to learn things on your own and pretty quickly. It's important to be flexible because if you just fixate on the language that you know, then it's pretty unlikely you'll find a job that you'll be 100% comfortable with. Instead, what I would recommend is to just have a good list of languages that you're familiar with and comfortable with, but also enable you to adopt and learn new languages on the fly. For example, Python is a great scripting language to know and is a pretty universally used language. Same with C or C++, a lot of companies use C# and you can easily evolve from one of those languages over to C#. And third is maybe Java if you haven't learned C. It'll also enable you to adopt other object-oriented languages. And of course, you should probably know JavaScript if you want to do web dev, because everything else is currently built on JavaScript. Those languages are all pretty popular and universal across the programming world, so you can never really go wrong by knowing one of those 4. Also, if you're able to learn comfortably each of those languages, then you'll also have a pretty good foundation to branch out and learn other related languages. The third thing they don't teach you in school is going to be good design documents or good design specs. Having a good design and being able to follow it and also explain why what you're building matters is the fundamental backbone of software engineering. Before you even get started coding a new feature in industry, you're probably going to have to justify why you're working on it and why you're spending your time on it, as well as working with the PM to dive out into the technical details. You also have to spend time thinking about the problem and thinking about the way you're going to solve it, working with other engineers and PMs as well along the way. Your solution will probably go through a few phases of feedback and iteration before you get to a final solution, and it all gets green-lighted. Congrats, you can now work on starting your feature, but it can be anywhere between 2 to 4 weeks later, depending on the size and enormity of the feature. Design document is going to be the main way that you're communicating your thoughts from your head onto paper and explaining that to other people, and having them take a quick look at what you're trying to do. Getting good at being good at technical writing is going to be super helpful when it comes to being a software engineer, which is why I've highlighted it here on this list. I found that university doesn't really focus too much on this aspect, but I did want to include it because it is a huge part of industry. Inevitably, for features and not bugs, you will have to write out why that this is worth pursuing, the impact, and as well as the solution and architecture that you're going to be implementing to help convince other people that it's also important and that they should be focusing on it too. The fourth skill that they definitely don't teach you in school is going to be technical interviewing or leak coding. Now, I know we all hate leak coding, and the big doozy is school just doesn't really prepare us for leak coding or these kinds of algorithmic questions that are being asked of us when it comes to interviewing. For most of us, looking at that one leak code problem the first time almost makes our head spin and a little bit queasy as well. In general, if you're also just a little bit newer, it probably invokes a little bit of panic inside of you. The best thing I can recommend here is to create a study plan that works for you. Don't neglect the importance of practicing, and know that the more practice you do, eventually at some point, the better you'll get. Even if right now you're struggling on easy problems, I promise you that over the course of 2 or 3 months, those easy problems will get a lot easier and you'll be able to start moving on to those medium questions. Your study plan should work for you, and it shouldn't be an extremely long amount of time. Anywhere between 15 to 30 minutes a day is plenty, and will give you enough time to review these concepts in your head and make sure that you actually get them before moving on to the next thing. I have a separate video about getting started with leak code and planning, so check that out if you need a little bit more information here. There are also tons of other resources and videos on technical interviewing that I found really helpful. For example, watching mock interviews are helpful, doing mock interviews yourself are also really helpful, and also watching explanations of leak code problems can really make that thing click for you. The fifth thing they don't teach you is knowing how to write clean, effective code. I think this is where most development will happen for a lot of people over the course of your career as a software engineer, right next to design documents and architecturing. Knowing the best design pattern to use for implementation so you can reuse this pattern over and over again, or writing clean, effective, and also secure code is a learned skill. Fixing technical debt is also another part of writing clean and effective code and going back and fixing errors where people might have cut corners. Unfortunately, for most computer science programs, I find that they don't really have a good standard or implementation for what clean, effective code looks like. And even if they do, they often really aren't carefully enforced, so when you come to industry, you have a lot of bad habits ingrained in you, and you also have a lot to learn ahead of you. Companies will also have their own standards and way of implementing code, so do your due diligence and see if your company or team has a kind of record like this. You'll also probably pick up a lot of cool tips and tricks along the way, such as a neat way to implement a search algorithm, for example, so don't discount those either. The sixth and last skill they don't teach you in school is effective collaboration and communication. Now, I know I've hammered all about collaboration and communication here on this channel, so you know how important it is to me and how important I think it is as a skill in the tech industry. I know I said that there are a lot of other top skills, but collaboration and communication cuts across every single discipline as the most important skill, I would say. You're going to end up having to explain to other people what you've done, you're going to have to help other people bug fix, you're going to have other people help you bug fix, and you're going to be working with other teams that maybe don't know you as well, and you're going to have to communicate and collaborate across different time zones and different projects. There are just a lot of different edge cases and different ways that you need to be cognizant of the way that you're communicating just to ensure that you're being effective and you're also not wasting anyone else's time in the process. You definitely learn best by teaching other people and also being humble enough to know when you need to ask questions to help your understanding. I've asked so many acronym or just definition questions in the past weeks as I've been onboarding to a new job. Learn from other people who have been in your spot and they can empathize with you as being a new hire or just being new to the team, for example. Even after you've gone out of the new hire stage though, asking questions is still going to be the most important part of your job. It cuts across any confusion and makes sure that everyone is on the same page when it comes to making big decisions. That's it on the 6 technical skills they don't teach you in school that you really find important when it comes to moving into industry. If you have any other questions, please ask them in the comments down below or in my Discord channel where I try my best to answer every single question. If you found this video engaging and that my channel has been helpful for you, please consider subscribing to support the channel. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you again next week for a brand new video. Bye.